We are Paul and Kimberlee, and this is Riffs and Rants. So this week's Riff and Rant, we are going to be talking about Parenting with Love and Logic by Foster Cline and Jim Fay. Fantastic book. It's really all about how do you effectively lead children, so all the way up into adulthood. And the lessons learned in here actually, or the wisdom in here, yes, is actually applicable to relationships across the board, in my opinion. Mm-hmm. So with that, let's go ahead and start riffing and ranting.
Rants are your department?
Yes, rants are my department. I do rant. So go ahead. What did you think of the book?
Well, I thought that at the very beginning they kind of break down why they call it love and logic. Mm-hmm. And so obviously in parenting, but in relationships in general, there should be some element of love. But the key thing here is it's not just love that allows for anything. Like, you don't have to take disrespect, right? Like, mm-hmm. What's the verbiage they use? It's not permissive, right? Like, you don't have to be walked all over and call that love.
Right.
So it's loving someone enough to allow them to make mistakes and suffer the consequences of those mistakes. And then the logic part is most mistakes have a logical consequence, or most actions have a logical consequence, so positive and negative.
Right.
And so you love them and you let the logic of the consequence come in, but they qualify that by saying with empathy and compassion. So if it's something negative, you don't want an I told you so attitude. That's a total turnoff, as everyone knows, to any kind of mistake. It should be with empathy, and you sorrow with someone for their mistake, but you can't take away their consequence. Right.
Well, I thought the thing that was really interesting about that, especially since, I tend towards the I told you so. It's something that I grew up with. Right. It's one of the things that they talked about is that if some of these things feel uncomfortable to you because they're foreign, if you evaluate your own childhood and the parenting style that you were exposed to, that discomfort is probably a good indicator that you're at least moving in the right direction.
Right.
Right. If you had a less than optimal parenting experience as a child, more than likely, if you don't take action, you will just pass that on.
You'll just do the exact same thing.
Right. That was actually one of the points that I picked out, which was, you send overt and covert messages to your kids. Yes, and while your overt message, the one that you're actually verbalizing, might be, I love you, I love you, I love you. Your covert messages might be, I love you conditionally, or
I only love you when you do what I want you to do.
Right, exactly. Or I'm actually kind of disgusted in you because you screwed up. Right. And I thought that's really powerful, because there's so many times where you're trying so hard. You want your kid to succeed. You want whoever it is in your life to succeed. And I see this even in peer-to-peer relationships with like siblings or spouse, right? When someone screws up, you almost kind of want to rub their nose in it, right? Like,
if you would have just listened to me.
Right, exactly. If you would have just listened to me. Right. It works even on teams. But one of the things that they said in the book, which I thought was really powerful, is that when you do that, you shift the focus. In gaming, we would say pull aggro. You're going to pull the aggro to you, and instead of the person learning and being upset with the mistake itself, right, and learning from that and taking the opportunity to learn from that, now they have focus on you. You're the person that they don't like.
Well, they put the blame, this is what I found interesting as well, is they put the blame on you. So instead of being able to gain the really valuable knowledge from this mistake, you just completely destroyed all of that and made yourself the bad guy.
Right.
So when really they should be looking and evaluating their own choice. What led me here?
Right. Exactly. Yeah, I thought that was a really powerful point in the book.
Yes.
One of the other ones that I had picked out was the way that you approach giving choices is really important.
Right.
So the language that you use, and also the way that you structure the choices. So two of the points that I picked out from the book for our 3 for 3 that we'll be shooting in a couple minutes was one, your choice of language and diffusing using non-threatening language is really important. Right. So, the quote that I pulled was, "The word consider takes away any threat and eliminates the opportunity to be defiant." And I think that's really important. That's something that I've struggled with personally, where I want you to choose something. So instead of saying consider, I'm going to use like command language. Right. Which is
better do this.
Right.
Or go
or you
and
should do this.
Right.
It's really important that you do this. Do this. Right. And of course that's my Army experience. We don't say consider taking the hill. We say take the hill. Right.
Right.
But they talk about that.
You should consider shooting the enemy.
Right, exactly. And they talk about that, the difference between like helicopter parents and drill sergeant parents. And I am definitely a drill sergeant parent by default. Right, that's just how I'm wired. Right. But I thought the way that they talk about using non-threatening language made a lot of sense.
Yes.
And then to piggyback on that. That empowerment, the way I phrase it is, empowerment is never an ultimatum, right?
Right.
So,
that's true.
One of the core tenets of the book is giving choices, right? So, providing your kid or the other party in this relationship that you have power over, giving them choices so that they can feel empowered to make a decision that they own. Right? Instead of you forcing them to do something, give them decisions that they can then step into and feel like they have a say in their life, which is really important for teaching responsibility as well as eliminating things like defiance and passive aggressiveness, all the negatives.
In the case of toddlers, tantrums.
Tantrums, right, exactly. I mean, even with adults, tantrums.
That's so true. Adult tantrums do occur.
Yes, they do.
Well, going along with this, that actually stood out to me too. They used an example of, and most of their examples are toddlers or teenagers because it's a parenting book and those are really good examples.
Right. Well, and I think that those are probably the two areas of life where people are, where
there's the most
child's
confrontation between parents and children in that relationship dynamic.
Right, because they're trying to assert their own control over their lives as toddlers and then teenagers. But go ahead.
But coming back to my examples, so they're using this scenario of a family, mom, dad, and toddler, and they're at a fast food restaurant. They're eating their meal. They're planning on going shopping. The mall's going to close soon, right? Like it's a family outing, no big deal. And the parents are done eating, and the kid's playing with his food, and he's barely eaten anything, right? And the reason this stuck out to me is we have given choices in these scenarios, but so all of the what not to do things, like you better eat or else we're going to leave you here. Well, obviously you're not going to leave a 6-year-old there. Right. So they're saying don't do that. It's got to be a consequence you can follow through. Right. So, that's what not to do, but give them a choice. So you have two ways of leaving here. You can leave, you're going to leave with me, but you're either going to leave hungry or you're going to leave not hungry. Right. Right? So you can't control whether or not the kid eats. Right. They need that form of control.
Well, and I said, like, you physically can't do that.
Right. Like, you cannot force them.
Not without breaking laws.
Right. But realistically, you cannot force them to eat their food. Right. But you can determine when meal times, like, how long they are, when they are. Mm-hmm. And so you control what you are capable of controlling. Right. And then that puts the decision, so, the what to do. Okay, body, here's your choice. We're leaving in 5 minutes. You can leave with me hungry or not hungry. And then just sit there for 5 minutes, and they get to decide if they're going to eat their food or not eat their food. The thing that they said not to do that I tend to do is I'm great at giving choices like that, but then I like to nag. Right? Like, you've got 3 more minutes, you better eat, you're going to be hungry. Right. You've got 2 more minutes, you better eat, you're going to be hungry. And then the interesting thing is the covert message that you're sending. Like, here I am trying to remind them, but the covert message I'm sending is, you're too stupid to remember a choice I gave you 5 minutes ago. Right. And, of course, that's nothing I would actually be wanting to send, but that's what we do, and we don't think about that. Right. So.
Yeah, I thought that, especially when they talked about giving choices, you have to give choices within if you're going to follow the love and logic paradigm, the way you give choices is really important. Yes. So they say you give choices within acceptable limits that follow a few key guidelines. You always give 2 acceptable choices, right? You don't give 5.
You don't have a handful of choices.
You don't have one.
2 easy to choose between.
Right. And 2 of them, and they both have to be acceptable. They don't both have to be necessarily nice, but they did say that...
They both have to be within your control, not completely over the top.
Right. And one of them can't be an obvious
negative.
Take this, and then or, you know, like it can't be like, well, finish your vegetables or you're grounded for a year. Right. Which is obviously an overstatement, but a lot of times people will give choices that is actually an ultimatum. Right. Like, you know, and we've seen this in adult relationships, right?
Adults do it too.
Yep.
You know, there are people in our lives that we know personally who tend towards those kinds of choices that are really ultimatums, and it's completely ineffective, and causes more problems. Right.
It just causes the division. Right.
It deepens the
divide. Right. And then once you give those choices, you have to live with whatever choice is picked. So, you know, if you give the choice like, okay, if you don't finish your dinner, you can't come with us to the movie, that means someone has to stay with the kid, right? Or, and this was, I thought, brilliant, like I just love this tactically, was that you said, okay, you didn't finish your dinner, you can't come with us to a movie, you can't be left alone by yourself, so we're going to hire a babysitter and you're going to pay for it, right? So, and if you don't have the money, don't worry about it.
You can earn the money.
You can earn the money out of your allowance or out of chores or whatever, and you can repay us for the babysitter that you incurred because you made a poor choice. And that was one thing that I really thought was awesome, because I hear that all the time when talking to parents. They're like, oh, well, I would give my kids choices, but
it doesn't work.
It doesn't work because I want to go out. Right. Or, you know, everybody suffers. Like, I thought that was absolutely brilliant. Like, no, let's just hire a babysitter. Like, we will outsource this problem.
I noticed that too. I thought that was good.
Yeah, I thought that was just fantastic. Yeah. So, and then if no choice is picked, then you get to decide. Right? So there's always a third implicit choice, which is basically whatever you decide. And again, I thought that was really powerful, even from a peer-to-peer, you know, adult-to-adult relationship standpoint, which was that, you know, a lot of times we'll kind of just throw the ball over to the other person and say, okay, you pick. And then they passive-aggressively just say, no, I'm not going to pick anything. And you kind of go, well, that didn't work. Right? Like, no, you have to take the implicit, like, you know, obviously in an adult-to-adult relationship, hopefully everybody's adult enough to actually be able to interact appropriately.
But there are cases where that's not true.
Right. And it's up to you, you know, A, to manage your own self-image so that you're sending the right covert and overt messages, and then B, to interact appropriately. So give good options, right? Not necessarily choices, but give good options. But then take action if everyone decides that they're going to be passive about it. Right. You can't just allow someone to just walk away. Right. Unless that is a choice.
Well, that's part of the not permissive love.
Exactly. So, yeah. Which I thought was pretty cool.
Yes. So there was something else that stood out to me, and we've kind of talked about this already, but using thoughtful guidance, and that is by asking questions, right? So especially like in younger children or even teenagers, you know, like look at their face. How did that make them feel? How would that make you feel? What do you think about this, right? That I just liked how they, you know, like they get to learn about their behavior, the effect it has on other people. Sometimes adults need that too, though, you know, like obviously worded more appropriately, but you know, we have to learn to think about our behavior. But also, especially with young children, being parents of a toddler stands out to me, but allowing them control. So it's really easy, you know, if you're a pet owner, if you have small kids or even teenagers, it's really easy to take control away and just be like, nope, you're going to do what I say and do what I want, and there's nothing you can do about it. But to create healthy, responsible adults for future generations, that is not the way to go about it. And the choices are what are giving them a chance to learn. It's giving them control, and it's giving them a chance to learn how to make good choices. Because that's the other thing they say is, no one just knows how to make a good choice.
Right.
That's something that has to be learned.
Right.
And I thought that was really a powerful message as well.
Yeah, I think the thing that I never really thought about, that this book kind of forced me to think about, was that there really is no such thing as control, like in a relationship.
It's
right?
true.
Like,
yeah.
like even if, like, it's funny because I'm reading this and I'm like, holy crap, man! Like our 2-year-old has definitely run us, like just run us like a roulette table at points, because you're going through and you're reading little case studies or the little examples or whatever, and you're like, man,
we've done that.
Like, she's totally done that, and really what it comes down to is that illusion of control. Right? Like, oh, I can make you do this, right?
Well, and what they say is the more control you relinquish, the more you actually gain.
Right.
So, like, the more you let them make those choices, and obviously safe and good choices, not just any choice, but the more you let them make choices, the more you're able to guide them and teach them to make the choices that we want, which are the good choices.
Right.
Right?
Right. And again, you can obviously look at this book as a pure parenting book, but I think if you're looking at this with a critical eye, or if you're looking at it from a perspective of wisdom,
in a perspective of relationships,
right? There's a lot of really powerful information in here when it comes to just pure leadership, right?
I think leadership and just interpersonal relationships in general. It's not even necessarily familial relationships that it applies to. When I was reading this, I would think of people, family members, but also, co-working situations in the past that I've experienced. How I would apply it to peers, friends, even in our relationship. Like, oh, here's something we could do to improve how we communicate in our relationship. So it's definitely, I think the thing that's fascinating is when you start reading books, not with the idea of what they're written for, but the idea of how does this relate to a relationship, you get more out of it. Right.
I mean, and obviously, in that book, Social, I mean, that's basically all we are, is social beings, right? The things that make us human are a result of or a support to social interactions. Right.
Well, we don't want to stray too far onto another book.
No.
But it does apply to this in that sense.
Right. And I think that's a universal truth in a lot of regards. Absolutely. As far as when it comes to interacting with other people, it really comes down to how do you interact appropriately from a social standpoint. Right. It's never about control or power. It really is about understanding your state, understanding their state, and then trying to establish some kind of healthy communication. Right.
Well, and just to wrap up, one of the points I had written down that really stood out to me too is a lot of times we communicate our love. We had talked about earlier in this segment unconditional love versus conditional love and the covert and overt messages. But a lot of times we, especially children, key into this, but I think everyone does. We feel love or respect, depending on the relationship you are in, based in really subtle ways. So eye contact, whether or not you're smiling with them, just pure body language. So it doesn't really matter if you're saying, I love you no matter what. If when someone does something quote unquote wrong or bad or not the best, if you can't still show that you love them in those ways, then what you're really saying is, I love you, but not when you do this.
Right. And sometimes in some relationships that might be appropriate, but they said for kids, you have to be the magical person that always loves them.
Well, you are a magical person.
Right, that's true.
Because we all remember when we were kids, our parents were the end-all, be-all, just who we wanted to be like. They were our complete role models, and then we learned better, or differently.
Just learned that they were fallible. And,
right. But, they were superheroes. They are superheroes to little kids. And so you are, whether you like it or not, close family members. It's not just parents. They said like grandparents, siblings, aunts and uncles. They're called the magical people in these kids' lives. And you matter more. You can teach more than
Right.
people who are outside of that magical person circle.
Right.
So your unconditional love matters more than anyone else's.
Right.
So
yeah, so that was some riffing and ranting about parenting with love and logic by Foster Cline and Jim Fay.
Jim Fay.
Jim Fay, thank you. So thank you for watching. If that was helpful or you learned something, please be sure to like and subscribe. It really helps us out a lot. We appreciate it. And then also visit us at paulandkimberlee.com. Sign up for our newsletter and find us on all of our social media. And thank you so much for watching.
Yep. See you next time.
All right, bye-bye.